Hello everyone, I am MetallicaRules, and for those of you who know me, you probably know I'm a huge fan of Telltale games, despite some of the recent criticisms. But like most people, I was introduced to them thanks to The Walking Dead. Based on Robert Kirkman's award-winning comic book series of the same name, Telltale's The Walking Dead video game series is set in the same universe. It's a graphic adventure game series broken down to 5-episode seasons, with episodes being released over the span of several months. The first game in the series is The Walking Dead Season 1, released in 2012. In the game, you play as Lee Everett, a former history professor who was sent to prison after murdering a state senator who was sleeping with his wife. On his way to prison, the outbreak starts and he comes across a young girl named Clementine, and is tasked with looking out for her and keeping her safe. The game was met with near universal acclaim thanks to its story, writing, characters, and ending, and brought Telltale into mainstream popularity, selling millions of copies and winning numerous awards. Being so successful, Telltale released a sequel, simply called The Walking Dead Season 2. In this one, you play as Clementine after Lee's death, and guide her as she becomes a young but capable survivor in an even more brutal and unforgiving world, and help Clementine come into her own. While not as well received as its predecessor, the game still received huge acclaim and sold millions of copies. And because of this success, it was expected that another season would eventually be made. And thus, in July 2014, that's exactly what happened when they confirmed another season was in the works. And eventually in December 2016, the sequel was finally released. However, it wasn't called Season 3, at least not at first. Instead, Telltale went ahead and called it The Walking Dead: A New Frontier. Fans might be wondering why not just go ahead and call it Season 3. And the reason being is because that's not exactly the direction Telltale wanted to take this season. In an interview with IGN shortly after the conclusion of Season 2, Telltale directors Sean Ainsworth and Dennis Leonard discussed how the next season would be from a different angle.
But yeah, I think with Season 3, it's definitely a new angle, I think, as well.
Yeah.
And obviously I have to wait and see. But
Yeah.
Back when this was revealed, many fans were left curious and some even worried what this could mean. Season 2 ended with a total of 5 different endings, most of which had Clem in different geographical locations and all with different characters. Some feared that Season 2 was the end of Clem's story and that this next season would be about a whole new character. However, Robert Kirkman did eventually confirm that the next season would involve Clementine in some way, and that it would be set years after the events of Season 2, almost to the current point in the comics. This stirred an even bigger debate about how they would resolve the endings of Season 2 if Clem was going to be involved, and just what her role would be. We eventually got our answers to some of these, but the reception was mixed. In June of 2016, the first official teaser was released, featuring Clementine and a new character named Javier Garcia. Javi, as he's called throughout the game, was a former baseball player who was banned because he was caught gambling. Basically, a Cuban Pete Rose. It was revealed that both he and Clem would be playable characters of the new season. Some fans were interested in this concept, thinking it was going to be something similar to Telltale's other hit series Tales from the Borderlands. Others still expressed concern over the way the endings would be resolved and were wary of this new character possibly taking the spotlight away from Clem, who has essentially been the face of this series since the start. Despite this, most were still cautiously optimistic. Then more info started to come out. On repeated occasions, Telltale noted how they were looking to bring in new fans to the series with this new installment. This led to some longtime fans to become worried about how much reliance there would be on previous events from the first 2 seasons, most importantly, the endings. Another thing that came out was a comment by then Telltale spokesperson Job Stauffer, who at one point said this new game is essentially Javier's story. Due to Javi's baseball career, he was never around that much for his family, and thus became a sort of outcast. Now with the outbreak, this would be Javi's chance to truly be there for his family and look out for and protect them. Now this could be an interesting concept if tackled correctly, but as expected, there were a lot of Clem fans who were upset by this, and questioned what her role was going to be in the story if the focus was going to be predominantly on Javi. In November 2016, the game was officially announced to be called A New Frontier, with the first episode set for release later that month. However, it was eventually delayed to December 20th, which caused even more worry amongst some fans. It's also important to note that, along with some questionable creative decisions, we also have to take a look at the company climate of Telltale. After the breakout success of The Walking Dead Season 1, Telltale's popularity grew, and thus the company saw a need to start expanding. At the time of Season 1, they were only a small studio of about 80 people. 5 years later, at the time of A New Frontier, they had grown to well over 400. The problems of this rapid expansion became so problematic that it led to then CEO and co-founder Dan Connors to step down and be replaced with his other co-founder Kevin Brunner. Under his tenure, there were a lot of internal problems, and the company didn't do a good job of hiding that fact. As time went on, more and more people were brought on board. Telltale started pumping out more and more games in quick succession, to the point where they could have 2, sometimes even 3 games being released at the same time. This often meant we were getting at least 1 episode a month. Sometimes it even meant 2 episodes in the span of a couple of weeks, or in rare cases, 2 on the same day. These quick releases and a focus on quantity rather than on quality led to a phenomenon I've seen some people refer to as Telltale fatigue. With the amount of games being released and with very few new things being added to them, causing each one to sort of blend in with one another, people began to grow tired of the same old from Telltale, causing sales to drop dramatically across their titles. One of Telltale's recent games was Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, and despite the huge popularity of the movies, overall sales for the game were mediocre. Internally, there were numerous problems. People were often being shuffled around and pulled from one project by Brunner to try and speed things up on another project. They often said that these games were operating under different teams, but how it worked was that one person would work on the first couple of episodes of one series, and then be immediately switched over to help work on another series to help get those episodes released sooner, and they only ended up having a general understanding about what was going on. This often led to some of the main people on these projects being removed, leading to numerous changes when these new people were brought in, as well as some confusion. Think of it like a long game of telephone. If you don't know what that is, telephone is essentially a game played by a large group of people, usually children. The first person starts with a message and then whispers it to the next person. This message goes down the line of the people until it reaches the end, at which point the last person shares with everyone the message he was told. What usually happens is that the message given to the last person is drastically different from the original message, and that is exactly what happened at Telltale under Brunner. Games would often start with a set concept or idea, only to get rewritten later on when new people were brought on board. Brunner operated under a philosophy that if you simply threw more money at something and put more people on it, it would turn out better and be finished a lot quicker. On first glance, this seems like a good idea. To anyone who has zero understanding of how a business operates, but to anyone with a basic understanding of economics, they can explain why this is wrong on multiple levels. First off, as many reviews on the website Glassdoor will tell you, cramming was a huge problem at Telltale, especially under Brunner. Creative teams were often pressured with tight deadlines to get things done, almost to the point where the eventual finished project was completed a mere hours before release. And even then, their games were still filled with numerous bugs and glitches because of this tight schedule. One of the big cons is how last-minute rewrites caused those at the back end to work overtime on a regular basis. It destroyed creativity, demotivated and exhausted the developers, and led to severe burnout problems. Secondly, in economics, there is a fundamental principle called the law of diminishing returns. This is the decrease in marginal output of a production process as the amount of a single factor of production is incrementally increased, while other factors of production remain constant. Basically, there comes a point in time where adding more and more people onto a project actually hinders the development of that project, leading to a decrease in quality, productivity, and efficiency. Again, this was a huge problem under Brunner's Telltale, and this was a concept he failed to recognize was happening right under his nose. Or he just thought if he spent more money and threw more resources at it, it would hopefully turn out good. Another huge problem was the alarming employee turnover rate at Telltale. Many people noted that upper management would often exploit some of their workers because of this last-minute cramming and changes being made to the games. It was so bad that people were working long hours and getting no benefits as a result of their work. Many Telltale staff members started to leave the company out of frustration, and instead of changing company policy, what they ended up doing was looking to hire people right out of college and try to exploit them on the cheap. Now, some of these people that were leaving were not just small-time employees, they were oftentimes the biggest names of the company. In February 2017, director of writing Pierre Charette, producer Adam Sarazone, and directors Nick Herman and Dennis Leonard all left Telltale and joined Ubisoft. Other notable exits over the years were Chuck Jordan, Dave Grossman, Adam Hines, and most notably, Season 1 of The Walking Dead creative leads Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin, who left because they were constantly butting heads with Kevin Brunner. And if you think I'm actually exaggerating some of these points, they have all been pretty much confirmed by both current and former employees of Telltale. In March 2018, The Verge interviewed over a dozen employees for an article discussing the toxic management of Telltale. A link is in the description below. This was shortly after Telltale let go of a whopping 25% of their staff towards the tail end of 2017. Some saw it as the inevitable outcome of, and I quote, years of a culture that promoted constant overwork, toxic management, and creative stagnation. Many noted that the culture didn't adapt from an indie mentality to that of a large studio, creating a culture clash between the old and the new way of doing things. This created a lot of confusion, as one anonymous former employee noted. People were shifting so often that you would hear a version of a story that was actually weeks old, and the person telling you has no idea because that's the last thing they heard. This gives a bit of credence to my telephone comment from earlier, doesn't it? The article also notes the problem I mentioned about diminishing returns, saying, to keep up with the workload, the company started rotating developers in and out of different games during the development process, sometimes in ways that employees say made little sense. As the developer schedule grew more aggressive, management sought to remedy tighter turnarounds by adding more people to the department, a solution that did little to help the problem. As one former Telltale developer put it, 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month. Here's some more proof of this. Let's look at the amount of writers that have worked on the first 2 seasons of The Walking Dead and compare it to the first episode of A New Frontier. Season 1 had a total of 3 writers. Episodes 1, 3, and 5 were handled exclusively by Sean Vanneman, Episode 2 by Mark Darren, and Episode 4 by Gary Whitta. Season 2 had a total of 5 writers. Head writer Nick Brecken did Episodes 1, 2, and 5. Episode 1 he had help from Andrew Grant, and with Episode 5 he had help from Pierre Charette. Charette would also be the sole writer for Episode 3, and Episode 4 was co-written by Eric Serpa and JT Petty. That's a total of 8 writers across the first 2 seasons of the game. Now, how many did the first episode of A New Frontier have? 7. 7 total writers. I'm not even factoring in the writers that would write for the later episodes in the season. When you factor those guys in, it's far and above what the first 2 seasons had. And based on fan reaction and professional reviews, most would probably agree with me that seasons 1 and 2 are far better than A New Frontier. Back to the article, in regards to last-minute changes, one former employee said, executives would often ask teams to rewrite, redesign, recast, and reanimate up until the very last minute without properly adjusting the schedule. The demands on production only became more intense with each successful release, and at some point, you just don't have anything left to give. Oftentimes, some of these people were working 18-hour days to try and get these episodes finished. And due to the episodic nature of Telltale games, this was a constant problem for the company as they were constantly releasing episode after episode. In regards to exploiting recent graduates, one source said, you get a lot of people coming right out of school going, oh, I really want to prove myself, and I really want to make sure that they see that I'm contributing, only to see them be underpaid and taken advantage of. The thing that broke my heart the most was seeing new team members that were just so gung-ho and optimistic and excited to be at Telltale get overused and abused because they did not feel comfortable drawing the line in the sand to say, this is my limit. They either worked themselves out and would get sick or would become bitter. In the interview, multiple people laid the blame directly at the feet of Kevin Brunner. Multiple sources describe Brunner as a creative bottleneck who micromanaged every part of the development process from pitch to final product, even going so far as to personally rewrite tutorial text. He would often belittle the decisions people made and demand things be done in a certain way, with some saying they weren't making the best games possible because they had to submit to Brunner's needs. It was essentially his way or the highway. One even compared him to the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings. When your CEO, the leader of your company, is being compared to this, you got a problem on your hands. Others note he was too risk-averse, not wanting to shy too far away from the format that made The Walking Dead so successful. In doing so and repeating this formula, it caused creative stagnation and burnout, and thus the games that followed were essentially carbon copies of The Walking Dead. The reason why I bring all this up is not only because A New Frontier is essentially the culmination of everything that was wrong with Telltale at the time, but this game is essentially the straw that finally broke Telltale's back and helped them realize that it is time for change in the company. The lies, the deception, the mistreatment of employees, it all came to a head with this game. One that, if Telltale is still around in another 10 or so years, it will be seen as a turning point for the company. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Why am I doing this? Hasn't there already been numerous videos about how awful A New Frontier is? Why are you just adding more fuel to the fire? Well, with the release of The Walking Dead the final season getting closer and closer, and Telltale promising a more return to form while also offering something new, I feel it's important to look back at what is considered the ugly stepchild of the Walking Dead video game series. This is the first of a 6-part analysis and look into The Walking Dead: A New Frontier. This first part has dealt with some of the behind the scenes and development stuff. The next 5 will look at the individual episodes of the season. We'll look at some of the problems, talk a bit more about the company and the changes, and hopefully have a few laughs along the way. This is essentially going to be one long, very long, review of The Walking Dead: A New Frontier. And in the next video, we will start off with the very first episode of the season, Ties That Bind, Part 1. See you there.